of course, this is the point, and I'm going to invite any senator who has an amendment or wants to make a statement. This is your moment. Senator Cornyn.
Well, I really want to start with a question. This bill purports to eliminate sovereign immunity in our courts for the members of OPEC. Have the sponsors of the bill considered what would happen if those countries reciprocated and passed laws which eliminated the United States sovereign immunity and thus subject them to litigation in their courts?
If the government is in a free market system that we presumably have, and they're acting as a commercial industry, they ought to be subject to the same things that private companies are subject to.
Well, that's waiving sovereign immunity strikes me as a pretty dramatic change in the status quo. The other question I would have is on page 2 of the bill, inapplicability of defenses. It says, no court of the United States shall decline based on the act of state, foreign sovereign compulsion, or the political question doctrine, make a determination on the merits in an action brought by this section. It reads to me like the Congress would tell the federal courts, Article III courts, that they couldn't decline to hear a case based on its non-justiciability under the political question doctrine, which strikes me as unconstitutional. Could you, perhaps the sponsors of the bill, reassure me?
Okay, well, I'll answer part of this. I'll let Senator Grassley answer the rest. As a practical matter, the bill is not self-executing. It grants the Justice Department the sole authority to enforce the law, and that means the Justice Department will actually have prosecutorial discretion to determine when and how to enforce the bill. And enforcement, I think you would know, doesn't take place in a vacuum. That means the department can consult as appropriate with National Security Division, whoever it wants to consult with, Department of Energy and the like, to help inform decision-making. It just simply gives them the power to do this. And I don't doubt that cartel members would rather not be subject to the antitrust laws, and that the foreign governments that control these oil companies would rather not face potential federal law enforcement. But this simply stands for the proposition that foreign state ownership should not give certain oil companies a free pass to distort global energy markets through anti-competitive cartel activity.
Well, but the question I ask is about the denying the federal courts authority under the non-justiciability doctrine to decline to consider a case based on a well-established doctrine of the courts that they won't decide political questions, but this appears to bind the federal courts, which strikes me as unconstitutional. But I'll just say, because I know the chairman's anxious to move on, if we really want to deal with the price at the pump, we ought to produce more oil and gas here in America. And the policies of the Biden administration in its war on fossil fuels, including canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, limiting exploration offshore, charging extraordinarily high royalties for doing so, is sending a loud and clear message to American energy producers. We are an energy powerhouse, but the Biden administration's war on fossil fuels is tying the hands of American producers. It's hurting jobs. A lot of people that work in the oil and gas sector in Texas consider this a threat to their very livelihood, and they're right. So supply and demand is, I think, where we ought to spend our focus our attention, and I think it's the policies of the administration. I know everybody's looking for an easy way out. They want a gas tax holiday. They want to do all these feel-good pie-in-the-sky things, which won't do anything to increase the supply of oil and gas, which is the best way to bring down price at the pump. But I guess our colleagues across the aisle, their politics won't allow them to do that or acknowledge the essential role of oil and gas as in part of our fuel mix. One of the problems our friends in Europe are experiencing now is they are entirely dependent on Russia for their oil and gas, and they think that maybe renewables, hydropower, things like that will fill the gap. What they're realizing, particularly in countries like Germany, is that it doesn't add up. And while renewables play an important role in the United States, it's about 20%. Nuclear, I think in Texas, Senator Cruz, is about 20% of our mix. But really, the best protection against dependency on authoritarian countries like Russia is a diverse mix of energy. And the best protection against high prices at the pump is not to tell people we're going to be able to sue these other countries in our courts under our antitrust laws, and we're going to bind the hands of the federal courts and saying you can't, we're going to tell you what cases you're going to hear. You can't decide that for yourself. I think this is misguided, and it will not solve the problem.
Would you yield a question,
I have
Senator?
some amendments that I will offer, but I will not do that today. But I think this is a misguided enterprise.
Would you yield to a question, Senator?
Who's got a question?
I do.
Senator Whitehouse.
Chair recognizes Senator Kennedy first and then Senator Whitehouse.
Senator, if under your understanding of this bill, if we sue countries in antitrust from which we're now buying oil, and those countries take the position that, well, okay, while you're suing us, we're not going to sell you any of our oil, and the Biden administration continues its war on fossil fuels, so we can't produce our own oil, where do we get the oil?
Well, we'll find ourselves in the same posture as many European countries where President Putin is using this as a weapon. And if we get engaged in that sort of controversy with these oil-producing countries, then it will raise the price, and we won't be able to keep the lights on here at home.
Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to make 2 points in response to Senator Cornyn's question. The first is that there's a well-established distinction in the law between governments acting in a governmental capacity and governments acting in a proprietary capacity. And when governments act in a proprietary capacity, they have to be treated more like other regular market participants because they're behaving like regular market participants. And I'm confident that the Department of Justice in implementing this law would reflect that well-established distinction in the law. The second thing is that there's one important fact that was omitted from Senator Cornyn's discussion of the oil market, and that is that it has a peculiarity. It is unlike other things. If an American company makes a widget, then they're going to calculate what the cost is of making the widget. They're going to figure out what they need to pay their investors and what their overhead is, and they're going to charge a price that is based on their cost. And that's sort of the basic principle of market theory. The basic principle of market theory doesn't apply in the oil market because the price isn't set by supply and demand, and it isn't set by what the cost is for domestic producers. It's set by this international cartel with a zone of speculation around it based on how international speculators make their judgments about the cartel price. So when the cartel drives the price up, which it has done right now, then what we see in America is oil prices go through the roof, which we see. Oil company profits go through the roof because while the price setting has gone way up, their cost didn't change. So they're rolling in profits right now. So you see profits go up, you see prices go up, and you see CEO pay go up. So there's not much incentive for the domestic oil industry to drop below this international cartel price, because they get to be like super big winners from it. And in fact, we're seeing epic CEO pay right now coming into these oil companies. So trying to get at this market failure, this discrepancy, this peculiarity of the oil market in which the price isn't based on cost of production, isn't based on the local concerns, it's based on an international cartel of highly questionable players like Iran, Venezuela, Russia, and we just happen to be willing to go along with that because it allows oil companies to overcharge American consumers. So I think that's an important part of the factual backdrop for this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Are there any senators wishing to offer an amendment to this bill? Senator Cruz, do you have an amendment?
Yes.
Would you please identify it for the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment FLO 22459. Let me say at the outset that I intend to support this bill. OPEC is a cartel that conspires to the detriment of American consumers, and it has done so for a long, long time. And I'm supportive of any legal efforts to try to rein in OPEC conspiring against the interest of American consumers. At the same time, I think it's important for the American people to understand that the cause of the high prices at the gas pump right now is not OPEC. OPEC has been around for my entire life. OPEC was around when Donald Trump was president. We didn't see these prices at the gas pump. There are an awful lot of Democrats on the ballot in November who have suddenly discovered that the American people don't like paying $4, $5, $6 a gallon at the gas pump. And so they're desperately trying to find a bad guy to blame it on. And I want to point something out. This is not an accident. These high gas prices are not an accident, and they're not an unintended side effect. Nor are they principally the result of the war in Ukraine. The prices at the pump are the deliberate, intended effect of policies pushed by President Biden and congressional Democrats. When Joe Biden took the oath of office, the average retail price of gasoline was $2.38 a gallon. Today, the average price is $4.23 a gallon. In some parts of the country, the price is as high as $6.90 a gallon. This is the result of Green New Deal zealots in this administration that have pushed policy after policy after policy that has waged war on domestic energy production, has waged war on domestic oil production, waged war on domestic natural gas production, and it has had its intended effect. And let's be clear, Joe Biden promised this to the American people. In February of 2020, Joe Biden said the following: no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period, ends. That's what he campaigned on, and he kept his promise. The first day in office, what did President Biden do? He killed the Keystone Pipeline with a stroke of a pen. He destroyed 11,000 jobs, including 8,000 union jobs. The Keystone Pipeline would have brought 800,000 barrels of oil a day from our friends and allies, Canada, which exceeds what we were importing from Russia. So my amendment, very simply, states that a judgment from a lawsuit against OPEC cannot be spent unless and until the President approves the Keystone Pipeline, which would benefit American consumers and drive down the price of gas. And so I would urge members to support my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Cruz, Senator Grassley, and then Senator Feinstein.
First of all, I want to make clear to Senator Cornyn that I don't disagree with what he said about energy or what Senator Cruz said about energy, but just in case it was implicit that this bill is being introduced because we have high gas prices, I want to make clear that whether we've had a Republican president, a Democrat president, or low gas prices or high gas prices, I've pursued this legislation for a long period of time, and it has gotten out of committee in the past. I don't disagree with anything you say about all the problems of the present energy policies, but why would you want to, an administration that's not going to move ahead with pipelines, take away one of the best tools we have to fight the high oil prices of other countries? And so that for that reason, I don't think the implementation of this legislation should be delayed because we have an administration that has an energy policy that we disagree with. Just generally speaking on energy policy, I want to say in this town, everybody says they're for all of the above, like fossil fuels, alternative energy, nuclear, hydro, and conservation. What's wrong in this town is everybody that's for everything above, they're against everything below the ground, and people that are for everything below the ground are against everything above the ground. That's what's wrong with this town on energy policy.
Mr. Chairman, can I briefly respond to Senator Grassley, because I think Senator Grassley may have misunderstood how this amendment operates. I intend to vote for your bill. I agree with the bill. This amendment does nothing to delay the enforcement of your bill, to delay its effect. What this amendment says is, if there's a lawsuit against OPEC, and the lawsuit is successful, and there's a judgment, they pay $100 billion, to pick a hypothetical, and that $100 billion comes to the U.S. Treasury, that the U.S. government cannot spend that $100 billion until the president approves the Keystone Pipeline. So it doesn't delay a lawsuit against OPEC for one moment. It simply creates a strong incentive to try to force the president to approve Keystone. And so I think, given our respective priorities, I think this is an amendment that strengthens the bill by allowing the lawsuit to go forward, but also creates strong incentives for the president to approve Keystone.
Senator Feinstein has deferred to Senator Whitehouse to comment, and I might urge all my colleagues, if you have amendments or comments, please, an economy of style will help us complete the bill today. Senator Whitehouse.
I'll be very brief. Facts are stubborn things, and the fact of the matter is that the price of oil is set by an overseas cartel. So we will never, ever, ever have energy independence relying on a commodity whose price is set by an overseas cartel. And the result is these massive profits, and if you really want to blame President Biden for the prices, let him set the prices, and he will be able to knock $1 off the price at the pump readily just from excess profit. So I urge no on the Cruz amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
So, Senator Kennedy.
To a statement.
Senator, your mic's not on, Senator.
I want to respond to a statement that my good friend Senator Whitehouse made. I don't agree with him that OPEC sets prices. I think the market sets prices. I think we see that right now. OPEC's prices were lowered when the United States of America marched toward energy independence. The market sets oil and gas prices. And what concerns me about this proposal is that we're proposing basically an end result where we don't buy oil from OPEC countries. I wish we didn't have to buy oil from OPEC countries. In fact, the obvious way not to have to buy oil from OPEC countries is to produce our own. But if you don't put a provision in this legislation allowing America to produce its own energy and have its prices set by the market, because they're all set by the market, then all you're doing is denying the American people the energy that they need to run the greatest economy in all of human history. And I know this is not the intended effect of this legislation. I'm not suggesting that. But I will tell you ultimately one consequence. If there is a shortage in America of oil and natural gas, and there is, and OPEC has enhanced market power, and it does as a result, and you pass this legislation and turn the Justice Department loose on OPEC, and OPEC takes the position of, well, okay, we won't sell you our product. We'll sell it to somebody else, and you don't allow America to produce its own oil and gas, then you have effectively killed fossil fuel development in the United States. Now, I know my colleagues don't intend that result. That's not what is behind this bill, but it is certainly a consequence of it.
So the question is on the adoption of the Cruz amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy?
No.
Mrs. Feinstein?
No.
Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No by proxy.
Ms. Hirona? No. Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla?
No by proxy.
Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Sass?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the yeas are 10, the nays are 12.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment FLO 22460. This amendment, and I want to go back to what Joe Biden promised on the campaign trail. The campaign trail, President Biden said, no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period, ends. Well, it turned out this is one of the campaign promises he actually kept. And in the opening days of the presidency, President Biden halted new leases on federal lands, both onshore and offshore. Together, production on federal lands comprises roughly 25% of U.S. production. This amendment uses the same enforcement mechanism as before, which is it prevents the federal government from spending the results of any judgment of a lawsuit on this unless and until the administration opens up leases for drilling on federal land, onshore and offshore. And this amendment, like the previous amendment, is an opportunity for members of this committee to decide, do you want to see U.S. production, or do you want to see America dependent on Russian oil, on Iranian oil, on Venezuelan oil, on oil produced by our enemies? And by the way, the foreign oil is produced far dirtier and does more damage to the environment. So if the Democrats vote no on this amendment, you are voting for fewer jobs in America, more oil from foreign nations who are our enemies, and more carbon being emitted to the environment, more pollution, because the foreign oil is produced far dirtier there than it is here. And I urge members of the committee to support the amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
First, we'll see if there's anyone, well, Senator Kennedy, you're first.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I am all for breaking the back of OPEC. I'm all for it. I'll take a dozen. But why does OPEC have market power? Why does it have market share? Because it has no competition. Why does it have no competition? Because President Biden has declared war on oil and gas. And he doesn't want America to produce its oil and gas. And therefore, that cedes control to OPEC. I mean, OPEC doesn't set oil and gas prices. The market sets oil and gas prices. If you want to lower oil and gas prices, yeah, do two things. Sue OPEC, give Justice Department the authority to sue OPEC, and let's start producing our own energy.
You mean if we vote right now?
I support Senator Cruz's amendment.
Questions on the Cruz Amendment 22460? All those in favor say aye. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? No. Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons?
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No by proxy.
Ms. Hirono?
No by proxy.
Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Padilla? No. Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Graham? Mr. Cornyn? Aye. Mr. Lee? Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Sachs? Mr. Hawley? Mr. Cotton? Mr. Kennedy? Mr. Tillis? Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
Nope.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Roll call be asked for, and the clerk will call the roll on the passage of the NOPEC bill.
Mr. Leahy? Aye. Mrs. Feinstein? Aye. Mr. Whitehouse? Aye. Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Pass.
Mr. Blumenthal?
No. Aye by proxy.
Ms. Hirono?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker? Aye. Mr. Padilla? Aye. Mr. Ossoff? Aye. Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn? No. Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Sachs?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy? No. Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 17, the nays are 4, and 1 pass.
The majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. S 977 will be favorably reported to the floor. The bill, as I said, will be favorably reported to the floor. There's no further business to come before the Senate. The Senate Judiciary Committee stands adjourned.